Okay, so let me start that over. So this is Wind River Grower Owns Plant to Host Garden Workshop. We'll be having 6 weeks of garden participation workshops where we'll teach people different things. So this one we have Shelley from the CWC. She was the one who developed the CWC community garden here at the Central Wyoming College. And so she's here. She has 50 plus years of gardening experience. And 5 years ago, she installed garden boxes in her current garden where she grows her fruits and vegetables. So she reached out, and so we would like to have her teach us and give us some more tips and guide us into, being successful this year with our garden boxes. So we have her, and so she's on board. And then, so right now I want to introduce Danica Barrett. She is our other co-founder. Go ahead, Danica.
Hello, and good morning, everybody. So last year, what we've learned with the Zoom meetings, that we kindly ask everyone to mute their mics whilst the guest speaker or anyone's talking. So if you guys could go ahead and do that now, especially if you're in the same home and two people on different computers, it'll prevent some of the feedback into the mic. As Dara said, I'm one of the co-founders of Grow Our Own. It's something we started last year in the wake of the pandemic. Dara had some insight and wanted to get ahead of everything because she noticed that when she went to Walmart, a lot of the produce was no longer on the shelves along with the toilet paper. Not much we can do about the toilet paper, but she had the idea, like, well, maybe we should start growing our own food. And we started with a strawberry project that we all participated in. And those who couldn't get the supplies, we kind of came together and helped each other, just a handful of friends, maybe about 10 of us total. And we decided to take it full to do more with it. So what I want to introduce is the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom if you're unfamiliar with it. If you have any questions, please direct questions there so that way it doesn't disrupt the flow of our guest speaker. And again, please stay muted while we have our speakers talking. It's also courteous, and sometimes we can't hear clearly, whether it's for whatever reason. And we will answer questions as quickly as we can, but we're trying to save that towards the end of the hour. But if you have a question, put it in the chat box. During every Zoom meeting, what we found last year, what gave some sort of incentive, is that we had complimentary drawings at the end of each meeting. So what I'll be doing is taking names of everybody that's here and present. And if you have to leave your name, we'll still go into the drawing and we'll draw for them at the end of the questions. Today, we're giving away 2 garden stools, 1 per winner. And the other prizes will be flower bulbs for Mayflowers, also 1 per winner. And then next week we'll give something, but we'll draw for 2 things every Sunday. And with that said, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Dara.
Okay, thank you, Danica. So this year we want to give an extra big thank you to 2 of our grant funders, and one of those is the Equality State Research Network, the ESRN, and the Wind River Institute for Disabilities. And so with them, we were able to get some extra funding to help an additional 75 gardeners. And so the back draw on that is that things are ordered. We went ahead and went with a local supplier, which is Sprouts. So Griff got that on back order, and it should be here in 3 weeks. So we're asking participants that have ordered those to please be patient. We'll get those to you as soon as possible. And another great funder that we have is the, so we got that one, and then we also got another grant, Wind River Indian Reservation micro grant. So we got that. That's going to help us get some supplies and whatnot for our kombucha and also our rhubarb. We'll be getting rhubarb for 30 people this year. oh no, I'm sorry, 25 people. So 25 people will get rhubarb this year. And, you know, that is later to determine. We're going to be really looking at the participation of the Zoom, the people who are really interactive, the ones who are really wanting to, you know, be here and give time. So those are the ones that will, you know, get the rhubarb. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Sherry.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm on a really unfamiliar computer, so this is maybe going to be a little tricky technologically for me, but if you can hear me, we're good to go. So my name is Shelley. I live in Riverton. I did, as it was previously mentioned, I ran the community garden at CWC for years. We had 90 different individual plots and gardeners involved in that garden. It was a really fun project back in the day when I got to do that. I grew up gardening. Some of my earliest memories are the big lot behind my parents' house where we live in the middle of Riverton. You know, helping get the soil prepped in the spring, which always happened with a tractor actually, but then planted and weeded throughout the season and then harvested at the end of the season. Tons and tons of tomatoes and tons of green beans because my mother loved green beans and they freeze really beautifully and go in they were our winter vegetable growing up. It is probably, this is a massive topic for starters, what we're getting ready to tackle here today. And I'm not at all knowing where each of you are in the gardening spectrum, how much experience you've had or what your main interests are. So I'm kind of just gonna really given this a lot of thought, and it's kind of challenging because actually the whole topic of gardening is massive. I mean, it's so dependent upon location, soil types, what you're growing, just so many different elements and components of gardening. I could strongly recommend that for more information. And I don't know where the rest of the lectures and planned talks in this series are going and who is doing those. But I'm going to just sort of try to do, oh, I know I interrupted myself there. Sorry, I'm really bad about that. An additional source of information, both of question answering and training would be the Master Gardener program. If you're familiar with that, if you want to pursue a lot or more gardening, specifically gardening information, and that's pretty tailored to Fremont County, which is a nice thing about it, and taught by people from the university, people with really specific areas expertise. They usually bring in people who can really address pest problems and soil chemistry issues. And it's a really big topic and really fairly complicated. So we're just going to sort of try to touch on some of the top points today. I don't know any other really good way to do this. I thought about going around and asking each of you to give me an idea of kind of what you wanted and where you were, but I think that would be just cumbersome as well. And then I might not even have good answers for some of that. I have a good 50 plus years of as an adult gardening in Riverton and Fremont County. And I will tell you that I learn something new every single year. It's a continuous ongoing process of what you learn, what you experience, the weather changes. There's so many different issues that play into the whole giant picture of gardening. But my basic grasp of the whole program at this point is that we're kind of focused on those garden boxes that Daryl was just talking about. And so I'm going to tailor some of what I say specifically to the boxes, but a lot of the principles behind what I'm saying will apply to direct gardening in the ground. If you have a place near your home that you want to till up or prepare the soil and plant in the ground, some of these very same, most of these very same principles will work both places, obviously. Sort of just diving right in here then, I think that one of the first things to consider when you get your box, and as you begin to figure out what you're doing here, is the orientation and the location of that box. It wants to be with as much sunshine throughout the entire day as you can get. We have a short growing season in Fremont County, but we do have really, a blessing in the fact that our sun shines almost every single day. We have minimal clouds. I am currently on the Salish reservation, interestingly enough, in northern or southern Montana, so southwestern Montana. And man alive, it's cloudy here a lot, and it rains almost daily, which is wonderful for some things, but I think it would be, it's just totally different than the environment we have in Fremont County. So my comments will be, of course, related to that, our Fremont County environment. So when you get your box or when you orient your garden, whichever you're doing, the goal is to get it as much sunshine for as much of the day as you can possibly get. You can orient your box north to south or east to west, and we'll talk about how to accommodate either of those situations as you go forward. But the location of the box, the key thing is that you need to have access to water, and you really need access to the sun. So no shady trees, no shady buildings. Late in the day, you don't want the barn or the garage or whatever to be shading your garden if you can possibly avoid it. It's also nice to have it reasonably handy to the house. Makes it easier to care for on a regular basis, and as well as easier to harvest and pack your vegetables to the kitchen. So once you've got your box in place, then the next question becomes getting soil in it. And I have to confess, I'm not really completely up to speed on what your soil source is or what your options are there. There are a number of possibilities. One of the beauties of gardening in a box is it's a finite space. You don't have to figure out how to amend a lot of different soils. You've got generally most or many garden boxes are 4x8 because lumber comes 8 feet long, and you can take one piece and cut it in half and make the ends, and then the two long pieces are second and third board, and then it's all assembled, and that's a kind of a standard size. I'm not sure exactly what size yours is, but I'm betting it's somewhere in that neighborhood. So you'll want to get the soil and get it in it. If you're using very local soils, they tend to be really high in inorganic matter, minerals largely. We've never, in reasonably recent history in our environment, had forests or any other big good sources of organic matter to be in our soil. Sagebrush leaves don't add much organic matter. We don't have the big hardwood forests like they have in the east of the United States, which drop, mountains of leaves every year, and there's all kinds of decay going on. And those soils tend to be really deep and really organic, and they're much easier to grow in than what we have. So typically you'll either have a sandy soil or a clay soil. Those are kind of at the two opposite extremes, with ideally something in between for growing. Things don't grow in sand, that from looking at the beaches of along the rivers and stuff. And they don't grow as nearly as well in clay as you would like, because clay, well, it has some positive chemical characteristics, it doesn't drain well, and it tends to compact, and plant roots need air as well as water. So clay soils basically need to be amended, and so do sandy soils. And the amendments typically are organic matter. That can be compost that you've made yourself, and we can talk about compost, or that may be in another session that is planned in this series. I don't know. Certainly a standalone topic if you want to get into composting. But in some fashion, you need to add organic matter to our soils. A really common method of getting organic matter is, well, there's a couple. One is to go to the greenhouse, the local greenhouse, and buy stuff. You can buy bagged products of various blends of animal waste byproducts or animal waste materials, manure. Whether it's cow or sheep or pig is irrelevant. That's really just a good source of organic matter for your garden boxes. The plus for any kind of bagged material, peat moss, bagged manures, is that they are clean. They do not have, theoretically they are clean. They certainly should be. They've been sterilized in the processing and before they're bagged, and they don't have weed seeds in them. If you go to your nearest corral and or just wherever the animals gather and scoop up manure, that's very cheap, very inexpensive. Sometimes it's really readily available depending upon your living environment. But that you'll invariably wind up with seeds that have passed through the digestive tract of the animal that left the manure, and that those can germinate in your garden box, those seeds, and produce more weeds than you're probably going to want to deal with. But it is the option, the trade-off there is that it's usually virtually cheap or free. So kind of depending upon your situation, what you have access to and your resources, you can go either way with that, but it's really critical to have compost or commercially available products or scrounge up manure to go into your garden boxes. And that can be manure from chicken coops, from where the cows get fed, horses, sheep. Any of those farm animals will produce usable garden manure. And it's really important because, like I said, our soils have a lot of inorganic matter, meaning it's basically rock in one form or another. It's ground rock. And it doesn't provide all the nutrients that growing plants need. I will say also that if your soil is well enough prepared, and this is really, sometimes this is a summer-long project, just getting your soil as heavily organically amended as you can do. That's a key part, and it's the easiest time to do it is when you first start your garden. That's when it's the easiest time. Yearly thereafter, you'll want to amend your soil to a smaller degree, but continue to, because your plants are taking some of that nutrition out every year. And unless you're on the side composting your garden plants, you'll need to, and then reusing and reintroducing that compost into your garden every year. You'll need to refeed your soil every year before you start planting in it. And that's kind of how I think of it, is that's the food for the plants, is what you put in your soil. So, and I am really just skimming over the tops of every single one of these topics. Could be a 2 or 3 hour lecture all by itself. So I'm just kind of giving an overview, and then based on questions that you ask, we may be able to go into some of these things in more detail at the end. You need to be sure that your garden box is located in some way or place where you can get water to it, whether that's with hoses from a spigot or water that gets pumped out of the nearby irrigation system, or river, stream, whatever your options are for water. it does not rain enough in Fremont County to support a garden. So you just have to have some supplemental water. And that generally, the kind of rule of thumb is 2 inches of water applied to your soil surface every week. And that's a real generalization, because obviously if it rains really good, in the infrequent times that happens in Fremont County, you may be able to taper off a little bit. If it's 110 degrees, which also happens in Fremont County, you may need to increase that. You really have to pay attention to what your plants are telling you. If they get the least bit limp, if you know, you can kill baby plants in a heartbeat by not having adequate water on them. The younger the plant is, the more frequently, but the less water it really requires. As it matures, that's when you get to that 2 inches a week soaking into the soil and really being available to your plants when that's important and required. Again, please jot down any questions that you may need specific responses about any of these things so that we can try to go back and touch on that when we have a time. Once you get those basics, your box location, your soil, and your water issues kind of in place and in mind, then then the fun part starts, which is figuring out what you're going to grow. And I'm going to focus mostly on vegetables, because I think that that's sort of our goal here, is to raise food. We're not so interested in raising flowers, although a lot of these same principles apply if you want to raise flowers. But focusing more on vegetables, some things too, I couldn't stress enough the single most common issue or mistake, if you will, that I saw gardeners make in the community garden was overplanting. Seeds are super tiny. Baby plants from the nursery are really little. It's hard to remember that a tomato seed is going to grow into a monstrous plant that's going to take up a ton of space, like a good 3 feet in each direction. A fully grown, really happy, thriving tomato plant gets to be huge. The same can be said for any number of other plants, and we'll talk some in a minute more about locations of plants. But if you write one thing down here today, with regard to planting, is don't overcrowd your plants. It's really, for a really successful garden, they need room, they need air, they need light, adequate water, and they can get all those things easier if they're not too crowded. Depending upon how your garden box is oriented, whether it's north and south with the long axis or east and west with the long axis, you'll want to plant or plan to plant your tallest plants like corn, tomatoes on the, well, there's some exceptions to that. Corn is the notable one. Corn wants to be on the shady, oddly enough, to the north or the east, if you have to make those choices, so that the real intense sun, which is the south and the west in Fremont County, your other plants can still get adequate sunshine. You don't want your corn to shade those other plants. It's also good to know that, let me think about what else was I going to say with regard to that. I think that was maybe the most, is just pay attention to which direction your box is going. In general, it's the most efficient to run your rows the longest axis that you can get in your box. So rather than planting little 4-foot wide rows, if your box is 4 by 8, plant a couple of 8-foot rows instead of the little short rows. Things will tend to be more successful. There may be exceptions to some of these things too, in specific situations. Most all vegetables that I'm aware of grow, actually, with the exception of sweet potatoes, which we don't raise really well in Wyoming. Most other vegetables grow quite well, and they range from all the little small spring things, the carrots, lettuces and radishes and onions, through the mid-season planted things. And I'll go back and talk more about planting schedules here in a second, but corn and beans, and then the real hot summer plants that are, and tomatoes in that middle section. The things that want to get planted later in the season are, cucumbers and squashes. And that's both summer squash and winter squash. Potatoes, potatoes are actually in the early group. There are just so many vegetables that go in Fremont County. That's really my point that I'm making here, is that with just a very few exceptions, okra grows really well if you're into the really southern veggies. But pretty much everything that you typically can buy at a grocery store, you can actually raise, and it's way healthier because you're getting the vitamins and nutrition from your vegetables will be much fresher and will have had way less time to deteriorate. The minute vegetables are picked, they start to go downhill. So if you can pick your tomatoes and take them in and slice them and put them on the supper plate or start cooking with them that day, they're nutritionally, that's the optimum time to feed your family those really good veggies. So let's see, I'm getting sketchy here, but I'm going to go back and hit a couple of points. Let's see, don't overcrowd. Oh, we should talk also about the fact that there are a lot of vegetables that are best grown from seed. And then there's a whole nother group of vegetables best grown from plants. And the plants typically are plants you're going to want to buy at the greenhouse. You can raise them in your own home if you're skilled and really attentive. I personally have a horrible time with baby plants. If you stray and miss a watering by 2 hours, in some cases, you can lose your baby plant crop. And I'm just not personally very good at that sort of attention. But if you're good at it and you want to raise them from seed raised plants are the least expensive way that you can get your vegetable garden going. But you would want to have started, if you were raising your plants inside, you would want to have started those way before now in the calendar year. You would start them in typically February is the optimum month for planting things like peppers and tomatoes indoors. But really and truly, your best options as I'm assuming relatively novice gardeners is going to be to go to the nearest greenhouse, whether that's Sprouts or Sweetwater or, and I typically really like to support our local businesses. It's kind of part of the same whole local, buy local, eat local movement that I'm personally really in favor of. But wherever you get your plants, the advantage of the local growers like Sprouts and Sweetwater is that they know the varieties that will grow here and that will thrive and do the very best for you. Whereas the big mass merchandise marketplaces like Sutherland's and Walmart and those kinds of places, they're growing for a much wider market. You can buy the same plants in Riverton that you can buy in Denver, for instance. And the things that will grow in Denver won't necessarily grow in Riverton. So it's really a bit more of a gamble, sometimes less expensive, but it's a gamble to buy from sources that aren't really close to home. Plus, I will also say that your money is nicely spent in Riverton and Lander in our local communities and supporting our local economies as opposed to getting on a truck and going off to somewhere else. So in any case, back to vegetable raising, the early things that you can plant in your garden, and you can plant them right now if your garden is ready. As soon as you get your garden boxes in place, your soils in place, your soils amended with plenty of organic matter, which we talked about, watered, you can plant radishes today, if you're to that point. Spinaches, or any of the greens, chard, kale, all those things, lettuce, little onions, and onions are interesting. You can grow onions from actual little tiny seeds. You can grow onions from little sets, which look like a baby shriveled up dry onion, and you could buy them in bags at the nursery or greenhouse, or you can plant what the popular trend now is to plant onion starts, which is generally in a little pot at the greenhouse. You can actually order these too. We could talk more about that in a minute, but the little pots of plants that you can get at the greenhouse that have a whole bunch of little onion plants already in them and started. And all you need to do with those is water them thoroughly, make sure they're nice and damp when you're ready to plant them, and you just carefully unpot them into your hand, pull the little individual onion plants out of that group, because there will be a whole bunch of little plants in there. With their little roots kind of entangled. That's why you want them damp. They're always planted in a real loose mixture so that the roots will separate nicely from each other without ripping and tearing the roots up. And then you plant the little tiny onion with its little bitty top in the soil, and it's really a successful way to get onions going and grow really beautiful onions. Again, spacing, they're a little tiny right now, but a full-grown onion is 2 or 3 inches across minimum. So that's how much space you need to leave between each one of those little bitty sprouts when you plant your onions. And that applies to if you're planting the little, what are called onion sets, the little baby, they look like tiny little bitty onions that are dry, and they usually sold in a mesh bag at the greenhouse. So all the radishes, the spinach, lettuces, those early greens, onions, and then potatoes can be planted right now. As a matter of fact, potatoes could have been planted a couple of weeks ago if you were ready. Potatoes, you buy seed potatoes at the greenhouse, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Buy seed potatoes, you can cut them into chunks and plant them in chunks as long as each chunk has an eye. And you know how potatoes will sprout if you leave them in the pantry too long, or on the kitchen counter. They'll kind of want to start to grow. That's what is the start of your potato plant. So you need to have that eye, that little growing section in each piece of potato that you plant. Sometimes you'll buy seed potatoes that are pretty small, and you can just plant the whole little seed potato in the hole and get a nice bushy potato plant out of it. What else was I going to say about potatoes? I just thought of something and now I've forgotten it. Again, leave them plenty of space. They look small. Maybe it'll come back. Anyway, once your early stuff is in and everything's kind of starting to come up and grow, you can, in a couple of weeks, mid-May-ish, plant corn and beans, and those are typically raised from seeds, both of those plants, products. And typically, yeah, gardens, a lot of people plant in rows. The new trend with gardening is to plant in blocks. And whichever way you go there, it really is irrelevant. You just want to be sure that you're getting sunshine to those spaces. Beans need, and I'm thinking of green beans here, not dry beans as much. We'll try to go back to dry beans in a few minutes here, because that's a good one to talk about. Then the late planted vegetables include the plants that need really warm soil to germinate. Cucumber plants. I never buy little sprouted cucumber plants at the greenhouse because it's a silly waste of your money, unless you only want 1 or 2, in which case that isn't so much money. But cucumbers and squashes, both summer squash and winter squash. That was one thing I wanted to talk about, was there are sort of 2 categories of squash. Summer squashes are things like yellow crooknecks and the little white patty pans that have the ruffly edges. Zucchinis, both green and yellow. There are a number of squashes. They tend to be a soft vegetable they're wonderful to chop up and saute as cooked vegetables. They don't save. Winter squash are the squashes that get kind of a harder shell or rind on them. And they're like acorn squash. There's a whole ton of different winter squashes, all the turban squashes, the great big Mother Hubbard squashes that are enormous and produce lots and lots of squash flesh to eat. All of those kinds of squashes are what are called winter squashes, and they're called that because you can actually, in the right conditions, save those harvested squashes in a root cellar or in a dark place in your, a place. They can't freeze in the wintertime, but the cooler they stay, the longer they last. But they're a great way to extend your garden production into the wintertime. Squashes are really hard to beat, actually. As a matter of fact, I mean, culturally, I know that you know the concept of the three brothers or three sisters, whichever way you like to look at that or think of that, but that was the old traditional corn, bean, and squash or pumpkin planting that Native Americans particularly were really reliant upon many generations back. They grow compatibly together in the same conditions. And the concept is that the corn is the support system for the beans. They're not talking green eating beans, though, for those beans. They were talking about the kind of beans that you can shell and cook up in the wintertime, like pintos, and there are a lot of different winter shelling beans that you can get. And there's a big, kind of nationally, there's kind of a lot of focus these days on what are called heritage vegetables. And certainly many of the old shelling beans fall into that heritage vegetable category. Super useful because first of all, they're beautiful and they have wonderful flavor and they're super nutritious, healthy. They're great in stews and chili and all of the places that you would use beans. They're a source of protein in your diet. So the winter beans, the hard beans, shelling beans are the part of that original old trio. And then the third part of that trio were the squash pumpkin plants that got planted at the base of the corn stalk. And they have big leaves so they can handle a little bit of the shade from the corn as it grows and still be okay, but they also will run away from the plant. I mean, they will trail, they grow out and be, sometimes 5 or 6 feet from where the seed was planted is where the fruits will develop out in the sunshine or on the edge of your garden plot. So if you're planting the crawling kinds of squash or vegetables in that way, and that would include cucumbers, which are not really a squash, but they're similar in their growth habit. And they typically lay on the ground and they typically crawl out over the surface of the soil. The plants send runners out, the vines go out. A lot of the winter squashes and pumpkin type products do the same thing. And they, where was I going with that thought? My brain. They're part of that original trio, the winter squash, the shelling beans, and the corn is a great traditional combination of vegetables. And they make really efficient use of the soil and the water, and they're really compatible and they're really nutritious, and they have the added benefit that the squashes and the beans can be used into the wintertime. So many of the vegetables that are raised in vegetable gardens, unless you have a way to preserve them, eating them fresh is wonderful during the summertime, but that doesn't help you much in December when you need those vegetables. So it kind of a whole nother topic, but there are ways that, and this might be a future lecture topic, as for all I know, but the preservation of vegetables for winter would include, canning and freezing, as well as drying, and then root cellaring, keeping the vegetables intact in cellars in conditions that will preserve them into the wintertime. So trying to looking over my notes to see what I've left out that's really critical. Again, I'm going to comment on the fact that the county extension agency that runs the Master Gardener classes that typically offer a series of classes every spring. They start in generally, I think it's in like early March or something, and meet one day a week for 6 or 8 weeks. They have professional people, really specialty people come and talk on whatever the topic is, whether it's pests or soil chemistry or vegetable varieties or landscaping issues, or planting trees in your yard or flower beds or whatever, all those topics. And pests include bugs, of course, which we haven't even touched on yet here today, but they offer much more in-depth information and knowledge than what we can cover in kind of these quick things. And certainly once COVID kind of gets more under control, which it certainly is, but it's got a ways to go yet. Being able to do those classes, being able to do today, honestly, would have been so much more ideal in person, where I could, see your reactions, see where you seem puzzled by what I'm saying, or where I can see that you've got, you understand what I'm saying, and it's not like going where I don't want it to go. Those kind of interactions make communication way easier than this Zoom business, but Zoom is what we have these days right now, and it keeps people safe, and that's really, really important. So with all of that said, let me think. I'm looking over my notes one more time here to see if there's anything else. Just that the Master Gardener program is a really great source of more information. The county extension people are very skilled and knowledgeable, sometimes not as much with gardening as they are with, raising sheep and cows and pigs, but they do and should have some information, and they can help you get into like Master Gardener training if you choose to do that in the future, get you on a list so that you get notified of when those classes are and where. Unless this has changed, and this year it may well have changed a lot, but I'm pretty sure that in Riverton, they are meeting in person this year. Riverton's been, it's an interesting place to live because there is a big component of people in Riverton, a big component that don't really believe that COVID is real. And I can't quite figure out where they're coming from, but it's, they sort of, there are a lot more in-person things going on much of the time than I'm comfortable with, but everybody has their own reactions to all of that. So I think that they are holding their classes in person. There may also be online trainings that UW has got going on that you might even still get tapped into for more in-depth knowledge and information. But with all of that said, I am not very experienced with computers, but I see this chat button down here. Do I need to go there to get your questions? Danica or Dara, would one of you tell me what the next, how we can answer questions? That would be probably useful at this point.
Yeah, if you go ahead and click the more button and then go down, it'll show you a list, and then you can click on chat and it'll open up the question.
Okay, oh, here we are. Okay, and then we have mute. Should we be watering every day? It depends on the days. If it's 110 degrees and the wind is blowing, yes, you'll need to water your vegetables every day, especially big, really leafy vegetables, because those leaves are just getting hammered. They're losing water out of the leaf faster than the roots can take it in. And so they'll want to be watered every day. And those would be, especially what jumps to my mind on that, are tomatoes and any of the big squashes that, pumpkins, how big their leaves are. They're enormous. We have a question, potatoes and onions rooted from those bought from the grocery store. That was one thing I was going to mention. Thank you for coming back to that. It is not a great idea. Potatoes from the grocery store are often treated with a chemical to keep them from sprouting. They don't want them to sprout on the shelf at the grocery store. They want to sell them to you. Nobody buys potatoes to put in their supper with sprouts if they have a choice. So they will treat, our commercial food system, supply system will treat potatoes to keep them from sprouting. They will sometimes go ahead and sprout. We have all kept potatoes from the grocery in a basket on the floor in our kitchens long enough that we know that they'll sprout. They can also, however, carry a potato disease called scab, I think. And that's why you actually don't even use your own potatoes to replant the next year if you have a choice, because they will often have the scab is kind of a virus, I think, and the spores can be on the potato but not really active until the potatoes are in storage or after you've kept them for quite some time. So starting with fresh potatoes, they're not very expensive to buy unless you're going to plant an acre of them. You're probably further ahead to get seed potatoes from, a mail order source or one of your local greenhouses. Next question, should you worry about cover cropping? I actually don't. And the reason for that is that there aren't very many cover crops. If you have a lot of acreage, like you're trying to raise your vegetable garden in a half or quarter acre plot, part of that you could cover crop. And then, the concept with cover cropping is you raise a crop on it and then you till that back into the soil to improve the soil and to give it a rest and to keep from depleting its nutrition on an annual basis. So if you have the room to do that and you can, by all means, you could cover crop. For a small vegetable garden and in a garden box, that isn't a practical option. So what you need to do there is supplement your soil nutrition annually, whether you do that with chemicals that you buy, fertilizers from the grocery or the greenhouse, or whether you do it with your own homemade natural manure and compost is your choice, of course. Either will work. I have plenty of friends who don't grow organically and don't grow what I call naturally, that do use granulated chemical products to provide nutrition for their plants. Can we plant what's this word? Spurts of lettuce throughout the year? Oh, good question. Lettuce typically wants cool weather. It doesn't like our midsummer screaming hot heat very much. So if you do plant it into the summertime, be sure you've got it in a place where it's going to get good shade during the hot part of the day from surrounding plants. That will help the soil stay cooler, help the lettuce not, sometimes if it's too warm, lettuce will just do its thing that's called bolting, where it just sends up the stalk that it wants to bloom and set seeds on. And if you can avoid that, you're going to have better quality lettuce for eating purposes. If you plant lettuce in the spring and then you plant it again in mid-August, you'll have fall lettuce. That's pretty much the only two times that I even shoot for. And often, in all honesty, by August, I'm so busy harvesting beans and dealing with the produce that is ready to be dealt with, canning tomatoes, whatever, making pickles, all those things, that I don't spend very much time replanting things, but that's up to you. If you can do it, that would be the time to plant your second crop of lettuce. A question, when can small tomato plants be planted outside? Oh, excellent question. In Riverton, and I'm assuming this is going to be pretty typical, well, it's not typical countywide. Lander, for instance, has a shorter growing season by about a week to 10 days than Riverton does. We're further from the mountains. Sort of depending upon where you're located. In Riverton, the traditional And I put that in quotes because that's just so vague and so it fluctuates. But the standard accepted frost-free date is May 15th for Riverton. So after May 15th, technically and theoretically, you're pretty safe to put your tender plants like tomatoes and stuff outside. Now you can put them out earlier if you want to use those things, the walls of water, whatever, that plastic units that you put the water in, and that helps protect the plants, and it also generates heat coming through the water, acts as a heat tank, heat source, and will collect warmth in the sun, from the sun in the daytime and radiate that back to the tomatoes. And it will also protect them in the event of a frost. So there are some things like that you can do to kind of extend your season. Some people are big on hot caps. I've actually rarely spent the money for those kinds of supplemental things. My usual approach to vegetable gardening is to get them planted at the right time and then hope that nature cooperates with me and we don't have any hailstorms and we don't have any unforeseen late snows or early frost. Those things you have to take extra measures to protect your plants if you're trying to grow during those conditions, when they can happen. Fremont County is probably one of the hardest places in Wyoming for certain, and in much of the rest of the continental United States, to grow vegetables. We have the huge advantage we have is great sunshine and clean water, clean air. But we just have such a short season compared to so many places. And one thing we don't have is tons of bugs compared to raising things in the South, where they do have more heat and more, better soils, that kind of stuff. They have way more bugs too. So we don't have to battle nearly as many pests in that sense. How about mulching? Do we need to mulch? Oh, please. Yes. And I should have said that. Yes, mulching with everything from grass clippings to, whatever you can come up with. Grass clippings are my standard mulch. I'm just trying to think what's available commercially for mulching, but grass clippings are great. If when you mow your lawn, rather than shredding the grass back into the grass, or if there's any other way that you can get some kind of product that isn't going to spread weed seeds around. Mulching is wonderful. You can mulch, I think, with straw and hay, which is especially good in paths where you're going to walk. It's nice to avoid walking where you really want to raise things, because we tamp the soil down so much when we walk on it, especially if it's a path that we walk on very frequently. And that compacts the soil and kills a lot of soil microorganisms that are really valuable and important. So if you can plan your garden in such a way, in boxes, this isn't hard. You'll walk outside the box and you reach into your box. And that's one of the advantages of that 4x8 box dimension, or something close to that, is you can reach all of your box from outside of it, which means you're not tromping around in it, messing up the soil quality. But by all means mulch, because it saves water, it keeps your soil temperature more even, keeps weeds down, lots of pluses for mulch. Then boxes, do we need to put anything under the box like a liner? I'm guessing that your boxes are open. Mine certainly are. They go right from the soil I've put into the box into the native soil that's under the box. And I didn't try to put any kind of a liner in mine. I think that liners are going to be problematic in that, another thing you don't want is water to build up around your plants. I mean, it needs to drain away. Plants need air just as much as they need water, and we all know that air gets displaced by water. So if there's a lot of water in your soil continuously all the time, your plants the roots can't get the air that they need. So being able to drain water through so the plants can get the water they need and want, but they're not sitting in it, is important. I wouldn't recommend a liner, in other words. Great questions we'll ask. Can we discuss overwatering and root rot. Huh, that's a good point. Yeah, you can overwater, which is what I just said. And the reason not to is the root rot issue, because roots need that air that we just talked about. And they will rot. Yeah, this gets to be a bigger problem, at least for most of us, in really tight containers. Like if you're raising in a pot that doesn't have a plug or a way to get water drainage out the bottom of that pot, say on your front porch or a house plant in your house, it's pretty easy to get root rot going because there's no way for the water to get away from the roots, and the water needs to be able to drain away from the roots. Even though the roots need water, it's kind of a fine, funny line there. But yeah, sitting in water is way not healthy for plants. Okay, most of them have Dara's just commenting here about wood bottom with holes drilled in them. Oh, we're referring to the boxes, I bet you. Okay, well, that'll probably work. Wood is good because wood is also going to drain to some extent, way more than like a plastic liner would. But be sure that there's enough holes drilled in them to let water out. There's no real reason to put a bottom in a box. It's going to rot the fastest because it is going to have the moisture building up on it more than anywhere else. But if they've got a wooden bottom already with holes, that's a good go. Put a small layer of gravel in the bottom. Whoops, we moved. Where did that question go? For better drainage, that's an option too. The holes are the best. You can do the gravel just like you would in a houseplant indoors. You can put a little bit of, some pot shards or a little gravel in them to help with drainage issues. It's still pretty easy to get a reservoir of water built up in something that doesn't drain much at all naturally, like a pot. If you even if you put gravel in it, that area will get full of water, and then it'll start, keeping the soil above it too wet too. Have your box inside. Oh, interesting. I would love to get feedback on that at some point. Just in terms of being able to get adequate light and sunshine, if you're planning to raise vegetables, that'll be a great experiment. The program has got you the necessary soil. And is there any way, yeah, I don't know where the soil came from that's in your garden boxes. It's great to have soil there for sure, but you might give some thought to where it came from and it came from sprouts. Awesome. It's going to be good. That's great. Wow. That's so to evaluate that soil a little bit, just feel it and smell it. If it smells growing and kind of earthy, if it's not real super crumbly when it's dry, like sand would be, or like silty, or yeah, that's probably really good. What I will say about the Bacto Professional potting mix is that it is not very nutritious. It doesn't have a lot of nutrition in it. It's designed to let water drain away from commercially raised plants. I'm familiar with that product. It's not really designed for long-term vegetable growing. So just be sure you fertilize your plants. That's easy. You get a good all-purpose vegetable garden fertilizer and put it on according to the directions on the bag, whatever you've gotten. And you can go a long ways towards compensating. And then, if you could have a session on making compost somewhere in your gardening series of classes here, if you're on the side making your own compost from your kitchen food scraps, from your garden waste material, weeds decompose into good compost, all of those things can make a virtually free and homemade, pretty readily accessible amendment for your garden boxes every year that you can dig back into your garden soil for nutrition and soil texture quality improvement, just all of those things. But yeah, you're off to a great start with your boxes provided, and the potting mix is a really much better solution to the potting deal than going out to the nearest hillside and digging some of Wyoming's native soil up and trying to amend that. That can be a challenge. So have we answered most of the questions? Is there much of, I don't know, how long were we supposed to go, Danica? And also, I don't even know what time it is. This computer.
It is, we've been on for an hour and we had it scheduled for an hour. So yeah, we can ask to see if there's any last questions before we do the drawing and final
Perfect.
last announcements.
Perfect. Any more questions? That'd be great. Strawberry plants in your box, great. Were the strawberry, question, hi Chessie. Were the strawberries, was it this spring or was that a previous year's planting the strawberry plants?
This spring.
Oh, okay.
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I wouldn't put anything else in that soil this year. They're going to have plenty of nutrition and they're baby plants, and you don't want to burn them. Too much nutrition, too much, especially fresh manure, can burn plant roots. So those little strawberries are going to be just happy as clams in those boxes this year. That's super cool.
Yeah,
You'll have to bring me some strawberries, Chessie. You'll love that. They're such a quick producing crop. I mean, and super yummy. I'm also really excited that y'all are doing the rhubarb thing. That's one of our few perennial plants that will produce a fruit here that I mean, aside from the true natives, the choke cherries and elderberries and the things that you can find, buffalo berries, the rhubarb is a really useful plant. Just plant it where it gets plenty of water and some manure now and then, and ignore it, except for after it, let it grow, but be sure you cut off that big stalk that wants to bloom, because once it blooms, the useful stems that hold the leaves, the part of the rhubarb that you eat, will get all pithy and not any good anymore. But if you keep that center thing from blooming, just cut it off, it will keep producing all season long, which people don't seem to realize. Rhubarb is not necessarily just a spring thing, but that is really cool. You've got these. Okay. Grown tree, another question here. Grown trees have now clay. Some have died. Yeah, right. Clay is so hard to grow in. I thought bugs, but now the soil may be the issue. Just spread manure. Clay takes years to fully amend it, and just as much organic matter as you can get into it year after year after year is the only way I know to start to gradually correct clay. My house is apparently was on the edge of an ancient river at some point. I have very few stones in the soil. I have some amazing spots. My front yard is just clay. I can dig a hole to plant something and pour water in it with the hose, and it'll take 2 or 3 hours for it to drain out. That's a bad sign when that is going on. And I've been fighting it for years. And all I know to tell you is just keep adding stuff to your soil that'll help keep breaking up those little clay particles. Clay has some amazingly positive chemical benefits. This all gets into ions and electrical charges of particles and stuff that I'm pretty weak on. I don't really want to talk about because I'm weak on it. But I just know that clay is tough to grow in. And yeah, I'm betting that your little trees are struggling just getting the air, getting the drainage they need and the air into their roots. That's the bottom line. That's what's causing your troubles. So good luck. And thank you all very much. This has been really enjoyable. I hope you got something worthwhile out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. So gardeners, just a few announcements before we do the drawings. So we give out some resources that came from the University of Wyoming Extension, and I apologize, my camera's not so great, but I'll go ahead and I'll post these on the Facebook page. And so we have one for lettuce, we have one for tomatoes, one for spinach, one for zucchini, one for carrots, and then we also have another one for peas. And so I'll post those on the page today. And then, so some of the announcements, so next weekend we'll be doing the choke cherry Zoom class. And so that one is gonna be, it's gonna be hosted live at the choke cherry planting in Ethity. So we're gonna start developing our bioregions, and that's where one of our grants came from with the Wind River Indian Reservation micro grant. And so what we're doing is we're planting 100 trees and Fort Washakie, and then 100 trees in Ethity. The Fort Washakie location will be behind the Fort Washakie School, and that will happen on May 8th, and that is Saturday. So May 8th on Saturday, that will begin at 11 a.m. We plan to have stew. We also plan to have goats up, and I believe that's it for that location. So the very next day, on May 9th, which is Mother's Day, which I want to say happy Mother's Day to everyone. So on May 9th, what we're going to be doing at the Ethity location is having a sunrise ceremony that morning. And so we're asking gardeners to please meet up, or participants and helpers to please meet up in Ethity at the Little Wind Casino. And from there, we'll walk to the location, which is near the river in that area. And so that will happen sunrise, and we'll be planting all day until all 100 trees are in. And we're asking people to come out. It's like a ceremony. We're asking people to come and say some prayers, maybe for somebody we've lost from COVID. We're asking people to even plant if it's for a mother, Mother's Day. So yeah, we're encouraging people to get involved. The Lower Wind River Conservation District here in Riverton have offered us to use their tree planting machine, so that'll help us a lot. So we'll get these in, and the area will be cleared in Ethity this week, and we'll see what takes. And so it's kind of trial and error, and we want to make sure that these things can grow, because these are our medicines. And so yeah, so there'll be ceremonies. There'll be ceremonies at both locations. There'll be elders doing a blessing and prayer over the sites, and also the trees and the people that are there. So we encourage people to get involved and do that. Another thing I had sent out, so one of our grants that we had with the Equality State Research Network, that comes with a 2-part survey. There's a pre-survey and then there's a post-survey. I've sent out the pre-survey to all 150 gardeners. We're asking everyone, please participate, get involved, because what this is going to do is to see how our program is helping and how we can make it better. So that's the reason why this is out there. We need your input, and you will also get compensated at the end. So at the end, there's compensation. It's only a small compensation, but it's something. So we're working toward, getting that. And then also for those who are real successful and have a real big success story, we're going to be offering another compensation for, their story being told via storyboard. So we're going to be doing that. Let's see, the rhubarb, we're hoping in another 2 weeks. They're ready now, but we're just waiting for the funding to hit our bank. So that will happen hopefully sooner. What else? That's it. And so Danica has drawn the names for the prizes and what she has drawn. And she's not here right now because she had to step back to work. She's at work right now at the Little Wind Casino. And so who's going to be getting the stools? She drew the 2 names for that. And so Will Dean Trosper will get one, and also Rubina Tillman will get the other one. And so I asked her, I told her we needed 4 people. Let me reach out to her and see if she's got the other 2 names. Hold on. And if she doesn't get back to me, what I'll do is I'll have her draw those 2 names, and she has the names of everybody who's here, and I will be reaching out to you, and that one will be for the flower bulbs. And so the flower bulbs are ready to go. They can go in the ground. They're actually they're already sprouting in the bag. So, you know, we need to get them in the ground and have them growing. But we want to thank everyone for attending. We'll continue to do this on the weekends, and it'll happen on Sundays for 6 weeks at 11:30, and we'll also meet for 1 hour for each of those. So we want to thank you again, and the recording for this will be posted on our YouTube channel, but we'll also be sharing it on our Facebook page. So again, thank you all. Take care. Have a good day.